Imageepoch was a JRPG company teetering on the brink of greatness. Their games would often release to high praise, and the company secured a great network of connections with other companies and gained the rights to make games for some very cherished and high-profile series. Yet something went wrong somewhere along the line, and Imageepoch closed under very mysterious circumstances. Circumstances that included the likes of a missing persons case. The story of Imageepoch at times is a very ordinary one, and at other times a very strange one, but it is a story that I think has a valuable lesson within its subtext. So let's take a look at the rise, the fall, and the return of Imageepoch, as well as its strange, enigmatic founder, Ryoie Mikage. Ryoie Mikage was a young, up-and-coming game designer in the early 2000s. He was full of promise and a list of accomplishments that most would envy. His input on the projects he was involved with was highly valued, and bestowed upon him accolades well beyond what the average employee of his age would typically gain. For his age, he was also a good businessman, and had no issues playing up his success to gain more lucrative contracts and loftier employment opportunities. Many believed he felt this past success was a quality worth selling himself on, and to an extent, they weren't wrong. However, his insistence to talk himself up at any and every given opportunity left many others to feel he was just an arrogant egotist. They also weren't exactly wrong. Mikage was a romantic of sorts when it came to game design and development. He had very strong ambitions that, unfortunately for him, he could not achieve as a mere employee of somebody else's company. If he was going to accomplish the goals he dreamed himself capable of, he would need to branch off and carve his own path. With a degree of clout and some accomplishments behind him, Mikage left his current industry employment to chase a dream that better matched up with how big he felt he was. Mikage sought to gain the job he always wanted by creating it. He was intent on launching his own personalized game development company. In June of 2005, Mikage, using his history of achievements for other companies to leverage his appeal and investor trust, secured enough investors to open his own company, which he named Imageepoch, and thus began the rise of a new budding company. Things started off good for Mikage at Imageepoch. They came out of the gate swinging, and the first 6 years passed by in a blur. By 2011, following the release of all 3 Luminous Arc games, 7th Dragon, Arc Rise Fantasia, and Black Rock Shooter among many others, they were boasting annual profits of 1.1 billion yen and scoring deals with companies like Atlus, Marvelous, Sega, Capcom, and eventually even doing boutique studio work for Nintendo on games like Yoshi's New Island, with a chance of working on upcoming Fire Emblem games as well. At the height of their success between 2009 and 2011, they had in their employment over 120 people. With all this success, Ryoie Mikage decided it was time to pursue his company's ultimate goal in a completely boundless manner. Mikage announced in 2010 that it was time to realize his grand romantic vision. It was time to save the JRPG, a genre that as of late had been dying. The savior of the genre would, of course, in his greatest moment of hubris, be none other than Ryoie Mikage and Imageepoch. Mikage's confidence, his arrogance, and his hubris and his ego all piled up into a monster of a messiah complex. Imageepoch narrowed their focus as a company and set out with a singular vision, firing on all cylinders. Mikage began by purchasing the internet domain jrpg.jp. On this domain, he posted a sizzle reel of all the JRPGs Imageepoch had in development, the games he believed that would kickstart the resurrection of the genre, the Messiah's Lazarus, so to speak. The future was there, laid out in a single video. A future of promise for the company, and for gamers and JRPG fanatics alike. But things at Imageepoch were not quite as they seemed. Operating behind closed doors and with a very traditionally Japanese shrouding veil of secrecy, rumors would start emerging that this booming company was actually facing very tough times. It seemed Imageepoch was in trouble, and that the company was not nearly as large as Ryoie's talk would make it out to be. Budgets were being stretched too thin, advertisements weren't doing enough to sell their games. Rather than the Messiah performing his Lazarus act, it seemed his creations were joining the ranks of the leprous. He could not spare his creations from the disease of the dying genre. By 2013, their 1.1 billion yen annual profits dropped to a very conservative 400 million. The value of the company was in an unbridled nosedive, and it seemed as though recovery was simply no longer possible. Games would keep coming out, but many were noticeably shelved. Whispers of big-name employees leaving Imageepoch were starting to slip past the company's closed-door policy and into the general public. People like Kazuya Ninoyu, who left Imageepoch to return to Square Enix to help sort through the wreckage of 2010's abysmal launch of Final Fantasy XIV. Sales would continue to drop. Employees would continue to leave. Rumors would continue to spread, and they would grow worse with every retelling. The future grew to a bleak and dark horizon that was quickly approaching. In 2014, it all began to unravel at an excessive pace. In October, Ryoie Mikage's online presence ceased entirely. No interviews, no social networking, no forums, nothing. This was the precursor to the announcement that would shake this niche market at its core. In February of 2015, following 5 months of total silence, it was announced that Ryoie Mikage had gone missing. He hadn't been showing up to work. He wasn't answering his phone calls. He hadn't been seen by anybody in a substantial amount of time. Following quickly on the heels of this news, Imageepoch's website shut down, and the website launched with the intent to save JRPGs, in a moment of irony, died a worse death than the genre itself had ever seen. No trace of Mikage or his websites remained. Investors and other Japanese employers were noticeably worried. Frontrunners and CEOs for companies like Idea Factory and Compile Heart took to social networking asking for any word about Mikage's whereabouts. No answers were given. What happened next was inevitable. Following years of declining sales, a substantial exodus of employees, declining stock values, and the sudden disappearance of their CEO, Imageepoch declared bankruptcy. Mikage's life work and his company closed up at the release of their final game, Stella Glow. What was once a booming company with over 1.1 billion yen in annual profits had become a money sink, a massive pile of debt that was owed to over 43 different creditors. In the early month of May 2015, Ryoie Mikage's Twitter account shut down. Some speculated he'd done this on his own, that he was running from his failure and shame and trying to live in seclusion. Others took their speculation in a much darker direction, fearing that the young and foolhardy Mikage had debts others didn't know about. Debt that could be owed to the Yakuza, and perhaps he was on the run from them, or worse, that his debt was paid in a way that would explain his sudden mysterious disappearance. In June 2015, Compile Heart released a trailer for their upcoming game, Destroyer Trillion. This trailer included the dramatic reveal of a masked man giving a thumbs up to the camera. This led to further speculation that perhaps Mikage yet lived, and secretly continued his work at Compile Heart as the masked man, as this pose was well known to be one Mikage often utilized for photos. But things were a little more strange than that. Taking the first character from each line of text that appeared on this image and reading it like an acrostic poem, we get the message, "Contact us, Mr. Mikage." Was this a strange joke or a legitimate plea? At this point, we entered a long silence where nary a whisper would be uttered. Nothing new would transpire related to the story for a very long time. For years, we waited for answers, for a sign, for any development. And just when it seemed that the trail had gone completely cold, and that maybe the story had ended as a mystery that hadn't been solved, there was a development. Nearly 3 years after he went missing, the silence had been broken and the answers came flooding in. Though the answers that were given didn't live up to the speculation, they were comforting and humanizing and created a story that would serve wonderfully as a parable for those who needed it. In May of 2018, Mikage emerged, talking with 4Gamer in his first interview since his disappearance. Mikage confessed that he could foresee the end of Imageepoch about a year and a half before the bankruptcy actually occurred, as large-scale games were forced to be cancelled, and these smaller-scale games, despite good reviews, were not selling well. With that trend continuing, investors started dropping out. Mikage likened the company to a boat that was sinking. In order to stay afloat, 70% of the people on board would need to be pushed off. Mikage may have been proud and arrogant, but he didn't have the heart to make such tough and seemingly ruthless decisions, and so he simply allowed the boat to sink. He'd done what he could to stick with the company until the very end, and ensure that everybody got paid, though freelance workers wouldn't be paid immediately. He spent the 2 years following the company's closure paying what he owed to them in drip supply. Once Imageepoch closed, Mikage hit rock bottom, as all those with such pride and confidence do when faced with the sudden pull of gravity, where the fall to Earth gets you as close to terminal velocity as one can come and still survive. Mikage was ashamed and felt downtrodden by the failure he suffered as a result of his hubris. At this point, he abandoned the gaming industry altogether. His only goal following Imageepoch's closure was to find a way to continue surviving. With his pride completely stricken away, he returned to an old truck driving and manual labor job he used to work in his early adulthood. Those who knew him in his personal life and knew what he was going through were worried. The man's mental state was in a severe position, and people feared the worst. It was stated that he was clinically depressed, that most days if he wasn't at work driving his truck, Mikage would simply pass his time lying in bed, vacant in mind and physically and emotionally alone. Though his confidence may have been his undoing at one point, a man with no confidence at all is an even greater enemy to himself than one with too much. A friend of Mikage's tried for a very long time to use his connections in the gaming industry to push Mikage back into game development. Though Mikage was hesitant, eventually he gave in to his friend's coercion. Mikage was offered an opportunity to work on a mobile game for a fairly popular anime that he already had a vested interest in. Mikage would take this job in private, and not be credited for his work on the game, as he was still grappling with the idea of returning to the industry as though nothing had happened. To suit his current lifestyle, he was able to work on these games from home, leaving his job as a truck driver to be a full-time developer and shut-in. Mikage confessed in his interview with 4Gamer that he had worked on 4 games prior to breaking his silence, though he has not stated what they are, nor allowed any credit to be given to himself for their creation. After a long period of working on games from home, Mikage finally visited the office that had employed him. What he found at the office was an environment that was warm, friendly, and inviting to him, or at the very least, more warm than his lonely apartment. For one of the first times in years, Mikage stepped into a public environment and didn't feel the weight of his shame. The judgment and ridicule he feared facing upon showing his face was nowhere to be found. For the next few months, he would regularly come into the office and take a more hands-on and teamwork-oriented approach to his job. Mikage was humbled. He learned once again the value of confidence, but understood also the price of arrogance. Feeling that a great maturity had occurred within him, Mikage came to a decision. He knew he had the skills to make a game, and he learned from his failures how to set expectations. It was time for him to bring his own ideas into reality once again, and become a full-fledged designer. It wouldn't all happen immediately, and not without the help of some friends in high places. But Mikage would begin his return to full form by launching his new company, Mikage LLC, and the website mikage.co.jp in February of 2017. Though Mikage launched his company in 2017, he'd done little to nothing to draw any attention to it prior to his interview with 4Gamer. For all intents and purposes, it didn't seem to exist in any real way until May of 2018. The first few projects he'd work on would be small ones, social, browser-based, and mobile games. Something just to get the ball rolling. A safe bet that could create a safety net for his new fledgling ideas if any were to fail or be cancelled. With the money he raised through these low-investment, high-return productions, he could filter some to new, larger projects on the side. On December 28th of 2018, Mikage teased an announcement in a 4Gamer interview that apparently utilizes old intellectual property from the days of Imageepoch. What property that is exactly remains to be seen, but Mikage is making a calculated return to the industry in a way that may very well be the successor to Imageepoch. Though I wouldn't say JRPGs exactly needed saving despite their lull in popularity, I am grateful to have had the opportunity to play some of the games Imageepoch created with intent to save the genre. However, I would trade those great games to see a man find a way to save himself instead. A strong work ethic, confidence, and ambition are valuable assets, but they can be twisted and combined in ways that become a detriment to the health and well-being of individuals, companies, and industries. Health must always come first. And that's why it brings me no shortage of joy to not only see Mikage return to the industry, but to return in a way that's less prone to destructive tendencies. It's my hope that the humbling lessons Mikage learned through humility are lessons that stay learned, and we can all enjoy his games and good health for many, many more years to come.